Hello, everybody, and welcome to this latest in the ValuesJam guest session series. And Kimberly, fantastic for you to join today. So to start with, please introduce yourself and tell everybody about the great work that you do.
Thank you, Alan. I am Kimberly Wiefling. I live in Silicon Valley, California. It is so exciting because here we call failure a prototype. And the kind of work I do has nothing to do with my education. I was educated as a physicist and then came to find out, oh my God, I should have studied human skills. So now I spend all of my time facilitating workSHOCK learning labs to help turn managers into leaders and turn groups into real teams that can work together to achieve what seems impossible, Alan, but it's merely difficult and eventually inevitable. So I have a team called Silicon Valley Alliances. We mostly work with Japanese companies that are globalizing, but I also work with companies in Silicon Valley and the US. And it has been a wild ride. Thank you for inviting me on your show.
Well, I love workshocks. I think that's great language to use. Now, Kimberly,
well, it would be false advertising not to say that, because sometimes people tell us, you make us uncomfortable. I'm like, you want to change, but you don't want to be uncomfortable?
now I think you've got a ValuesJam card deck there, haven't you?
I sure do.
All right, so what I'd like you to do, if you wouldn't mind, please, is to tip the cards out. And then if you could divide them, not necessarily evenly, into 4 piles in front of you.
4 piles. Okay. I'm going to divide them into 4 piles. I'm sure my favorite cards will come to the top. All right, I got them.
Right, so what do you want to do? Do you want to choose the pile, or do you want to choose the card within a pile that I choose?
I want you to choose the pile and I will choose the card.
All right, so you go for pile number 3 and then choose a number.
All right, pile number 3, and I'll choose 7.
What is it?
Humility.
Ooh.
Ooh.
So, what does humility mean? What does it look, sound, and feel like?
Well, I have heard that the best leaders have a combination of competence and warmth, and that comes from having this humility that they're grounded in. So if you want to be a great leader, you have to understand that when great things happen, you look at your people and say, aren't they amazing? They did it. And when things don't go well, you look in the mirror and say, how did I contribute to this difficulty, and how might I contribute to making it better? And for me, that's operationalizing humility.
Yeah, and you're making me think about, in leadership situations, it seems to me that leaders often overplay the impact that they've actually had on something happening. And not just leaders, actually. It's like when things happen to us, if it's a wonderful experience that we've had, if you're honest with yourself, answering the question, what did I contribute to make that outcome versus what just happened by fortune or through other people, your role in it is slight, actually. And humility strikes me as having that perception, not overstating the role that you've played and understanding it in perspective to the whole world and what happened to result in whatever happened.
Oh, I love that. Yeah, I think we do need to understand so much of what we achieve in life. We can chalk up to lucky circumstances or chance. I mean, one of the things that happened to me, I was working with UC Santa Cruz Extension. I was teaching a really simple little class called Project Leadership and Communication. And I was doing it in my wild style, like brain expanding, very active and interactive and engaging, and come to the attention somehow of this person who was scheduling Japanese people to come and visit Silicon Valley. And while one year I was asked just to do a 2-hour workshop. So I did a 2-hour workshop for one of the big Japanese companies, and they loved it, but nothing else happened. A year later, the same person brought another company over to Silicon Valley. I did a 6-hour workshop. And at the end, this person says, "Do you want to have dinner?" I'm like, okay. At dinner, she says, "Would you like to come to Japan?" Okay. Hey, I've been to Japan 100 times in the last 15 years. I've worked with over 50 Japanese companies that are globalizing, big names. And I've been all over the world for Japanese companies, even outside of Japan. So all of that happens just by pure luck.
Yeah.
I didn't deserve it. I didn't earn it. They didn't scour the planet for the best person for them. They just encountered me, and somehow it was like, woo.
Yeah, but so I'm going to contradict myself, it sounds like now, Kimberly, because like you've just said, you didn't make that happen necessarily, right? In itself. But there were things that you did that probably enabled it to happen rather than you getting in the way of it happening.
Yeah, tell me more.
Well, so I'll give you an example, which I think is along similar lines to the story that you just told. A few years ago, I was writing this book, The Values Economy, and I was invited to speak at a conference in New York by some guys that I know. And they said, "The thing is, Alan, we're just starting up and we haven't got much money. So we cannot afford to pay for your plane ticket. We cannot afford to pay you a fee. And we cannot afford to accommodate you while you're in New York." So rational voice said, "Well, you can't go. That's straight, isn't it?" The other voice said, "Wait a minute, these are good guys and you like New York and you can take your camera and spend the weekend there. So why not go?" So I agreed to go. 2 weeks later, they sent through the program. And on the program was the name Philip Kotler. Now, Philip Kotler is the grandfather of marketing. He's kind of written 80 odd books about the topic, distinguished professor. And it was his textbook that we had to read at university for our marketing module. So I was like, oh my God, I'm going to be on the same stage as this distinguished man. At the conference, I introduced myself. He was a lovely, lovely man. And I just mentioned that I was writing the Values Economy book. Would he be interested to see the draft manuscript? He said yes. So I got a bit braver when I got home and sent the email saying, "Would you like to write the foreword to the book?" And he agreed. So on the cover, it says, "An excellent and insightful addition to our business literature, Philip Kotler."
Oh my gosh.
The parallel, I think, with the stories is that you were out there and you were open to things happening. And just in both stories, neither of us made that happen, but we kind of didn't get in the way and we allowed it through our openness and willingness to be part of what was developing.
Yeah, I think that goes along with being absolutely committed to putting ourselves out there and being out there in the universe without being attached to a particular outcome, and just being open to possibilities.
Yeah. And is there something there about the relationship between humility and what you've described? Because I think that when somebody has a very fixed notion of the outcome that they're striving to achieve, doesn't that make humility more of a challenge?
I think you're right. I think humility is to say, hey, I know everything. I'm open to the possibilities, and there's a whole bunch of things that I don't know. I mean, I do some modules in our workshops that is they're designed to show really super smart people that your brain, it's lying to you. I have a couple of exercises that prove to all these brilliant people that I work with that you can't see, you can't hear, you can't add, and you can't count. and I can prove it in under 20 minutes. And then when people see all that, they're like, oh my gosh. So you start to be a little more open to possibilities rather than being absolutely sure. You know, I have a lot of people that I know who are often wrong, but never in doubt.
And what's your experience with organizations, Kimberly? Because it seems to me that now we're talking about this topic of humility. I don't think I've ever seen any training or development around humility, whereas there are reams and rafts and tomes of stuff about all of these other things. So what's that all about?
Yeah, that's really a topic that's been on my mind a lot lately, Alan. I have found myself here in the midst of Silicon Valley, and they're super smart people, brilliant, they're creative, they're geniuses. Sometimes I feel, okay, I'm smart, but this person probably feels like they're talking to a mushroom when they talk to me, right? But these people have so many challenges as well, and they don't realize that as smart as they are, they don't realize that their brain still sends them a bunch of cognitive distortions and illusions, and they buy into it as fact. And the trouble is, as you become promoted and have more positional power or authority or power of any kind, people don't give you honest feedback. I mean, so we deny these people an honest look at themselves. So they don't often get the mirror held up to them. And what I've found, especially with executives, is they just can't imagine that they are responsible for a lot of the problems that their organization is facing, or when they are confronted with that, they just can't handle it. And so that's partly why I spend most of my time working with Japanese companies, because in Japan, the executives come to the workshops and they say, I'm 62 years old. I'm going to retire and play golf. You have to lead this company in the future. Pay attention. Because when I suggest that the executives do our workshops, they say, oh no, Kimberly-san, it's too difficult. But in the US, I was still trying to get the executives to get on board and say, look, you're contributing to some of the challenges here. You know you are, because you're the leaders. And when I find out that you're contributing certain challenges, how do you want me to tell you? And they always say, oh yeah, just tell us, Kimberly. But then when I gather input from their people and I bring it back to them for them to look at as this precious feedback, Alan, the first question they ask, can you imagine when I tell them, hey, here's some of the stuff executives are doing that are causing your people to think that they don't need to change. They need you to change first. You know what they ask me?
Go on.
Who said that? Can you imagine the first question you ask when you're given this precious gift of feedback about how the executives are contributing to the problems executives want to solve? The first question they ask is who said that, when they know it's anonymous. Okay. And it has happened in every single case except for one.
Wow. And you'll like this too. I had a recent similar experience. It was in the topic of inclusion, and it was feedback from people of color in the organization who were basically saying it's an old boys network. That's how this company works.
Yeah.
So the feedback was given to a group of senior executives, and the first response was, well, I don't think it's like that anymore because we've done loads of work in this area. And then somebody else said, yeah, we've had the such and such. And so it was all justification. And then one voice said, are you hearing yourselves here? Isn't this interesting how nobody has accepted what's been said? You've all tried to rationalize it. Let's just take it on board and decide how we're going to deal with it.
Beautiful.
And when you were talking about us feeding ourselves misinformation, you reminded me, and you'll find this with ValuesJam, Kimberly, as you use it. What happens often in a ValuesJam is that a memory that is either hidden or quite deep is brought to the surface through the conversation. And this story, I can't remember telling anybody about this for maybe 10 years. But anyway, this guy said to me, my colleague is a president of a company, and he was visiting another company, and he was really impressed at the welcome that he got by the receptionist. And he said, and she took me to the meeting room and she offered me a coffee and she really looked after me. I was very, very impressed. And this guy then said, and I said to him, she didn't look after you. She didn't get you a cup of coffee. She did that for your title.
Oh.
And it is this thing, right? When you're in a position of authority and power, you get looked after very well by organizations and by people. But then we convince ourselves it's because we're a nice person.
Well, now, do you know the research out of Stanford University, Bob Sutton?
No, tell me.
Well, he's the guy who wrote the Knowing Doing Gap, and then he wrote the No Asshole Rule, and then the Asshole Survival Guide. So he kind of popularized the term asshole as a Stanford professor. He wouldn't let the Harvard Business Review publish his article initially unless they let him use the word asshole. Anyway, I know Bob, I've met him personally. He's an amazing guy. Anyhow, he did some research on power poisoning. And if you look at the research he's done on power poisoning, he found that people who have power, they receive more positive feedback and they have lower impulse control and they have thinking about their own needs more than others. They spend time thinking about their own needs and they have lower empathy and they think the rules don't apply to them. Okay, so that's the 5 areas, the feedback, impulse control, needs, empathy, and rules. And then he asked the incisive question, do we just promote these kind of assholes or does power change people? And what he found beyond a shadow of a doubt in his research was power changes people. And we are also subject to that. And we need to put protections in place so that when we accumulate any kind of power, we will be kept humble. We need help with humility.
Well, so this is playing to our conversation, right? So what we're saying here is that it's no surprise that leaders and people in positions of power don't have humility because they're fed something completely different.
That's right. Yeah. And when you're in a position of power, well, one of the analogs I love is like this. Imagine an organization is like a bunch of monkeys in a tree. They're all over the tree. And you're the top monkey. And you're looking down at this tree full of monkeys. What do you see, Alan? A bunch of smiling faces looking up at you. Yeah. But hey, if you're the bottom monkey looking up, you know what you see. So
was that Bob as well?
It's a great visual. And I've heard that someone like, who was it? Colin Powell, that when he got a position of power in government, he took aside a few of his buddies and he said, watch me. If I start acting like this, call me on it. Because you need some way to keep yourself humble in the face of that kind of power and being cut off from any real feedback, real honest feedback about yourself. People don't tell you. If you have a piece of seaweed on your tooth and you're laughing and smiling and talking, and nobody told you, you'd think they were mean. But when people are in power, we do not take that kind of risk to help them the way they need help.
So let's explore the other side of this coin then. So we've talked quite a lot about why there is not humility. So could you tell me about a time when you have experienced humility?
Oh, well, it helps to make a mistake and then have people be supportive. I have a wonderful team of people called Silicon Valley Alliances that I work with. Yeah. And, we do a lot of very intense work. We call it workSHOCK therapy, learning labs. And sometimes it's just exhausting. And it's so emotional as well. And I was working with a couple of my colleagues from Japan. And I just was having such a bad day, and I was losing my perspective, and I was not being rational, and I was being hypercritical to these poor, wonderful colleagues of mine. And during lunchtime, I hid behind the whiteboard because I thought, oh my gosh, I've been such a jerk, and they're going to come and just rip me a new one, right? Well, they come back to me and they said, are you okay? They were concerned about me. And so I lost all of that like boisterousness. And suddenly it was like, oh my gosh, I am with people who have more compassion than I can even imagine, and who are here to help and support and partner with me. And I felt truly humbled by that, because I don't know if I would have had the presence of mind to behave like that in the face of the kind of ridiculous behavior I was exhibiting.
Okay. My example takes me back some years. My first career was in commercial hospitality management. So I ended up running 5-star hotels and conference centers and the like. And I was in the events function at the London Intercontinental. It's at the bottom of Park Lane in London. And the head chef there was the first chef in a hotel in London to gain a Michelin star for his restaurant. So really top level. Called Peter Kronberg. He's no longer with us, sadly. But he, I don't know if you know about the structure in a kitchen, but you've got the executive head chef, who is the top guy, and then you've got a pretty serious ranking down to a commie chef. So the most junior level is a commie chef. And Peter set up a scheme where obviously coming to a hotel like that was very attractive for people from different countries. And so a lot of the commies would be from Far East, from America, from Europe, Africa. And Peter always would welcome a new commie chef personally. When you think about, I think his brigade was around about 60 chefs. And one of the first questions he used to ask them was, could you please cook me your mother's favorite dish? Because what he said was that this was the best way to learn new techniques and experiment with flavors. And what struck me about this was that this guy, probably if he was a different mentality, he wouldn't even have to acknowledge these people, right? But he was just so interested in them, and they loved working with him and for him. So that's thank you for that, because that memory also is one I haven't had for some time.
Well, there is an exercise that I find helps connect people at that level. It's called a life journey line.
Okay.
And I think I learned it long ago from one of Patrick Lencioni's books, the 5 dysfunctions of a team. Aren't you surprised there's only 5, Alan? Yeah. So he talks about a life journey where you share it. What we do is we have people draw their life journey, draw your happiness versus time over the course of your life. And you can imagine what people draw, right? And it's something when you hang all of these pictures on the wall of all of these drawings, dozens of people from 15 different countries, and they all look at it and say, oh my gosh, everybody has ups and downs. It's not only me.
Yeah.
I'm not the only one who had a challenging life. And then you start to say, oh my gosh, we all have this kind of positivity bias because the line is going up and to the right. So that means we all have hope. And you start to discover what you have in common with these other human beings beyond the mask.
Yeah. And something else you're reminding me of is when I run working sessions with my client organizations, the ones I enjoy most are those of mixed hierarchy and mixed function. So that you might have the finance director sitting next to a cleaner. And often in those environments, I find that you get more value from somebody, for instance, who's paid much less, is much more junior in the organization, but maybe they've decided to leave their home country with a child or children. They've had to hold down 3 jobs. They've had to try and find how to deal with accommodation, a new language maybe, compared to and you know, I'm generalizing here, but the finance director who might have gone to privately paid for schooling, did well at university, got a job because his dad knew somebody, got promoted pretty quickly, and is a young finance director. You know, who's going to give you more rich life experience?
Yeah. Well, you do get a different perspective from the other parts of the organization. I mean, I work mostly with the middle layers.
Yeah.
Um, Usually, if I'm working with the individual contributors who aren't even managers, they always say, "Oh, Kimberly, you should get the managers in your workshops because they're the ones who really are the problem," right?
Yeah.
And then the managers, of course, I get them in there and they say, "You should get the executives
Yeah.
because they're the ones," and the executives blame the president blames the chairman, whatever. But like mostly working with these middle layer, they can see what's going on in ways that the executives can't.
Yeah.
And one of the teams we work with for the last 16 years, we've taken groups of these middle layers and we've asked them, all right, work on a 7-month project and pick something that you think will transform this company to become a truly global company that solves global problems profitably so that they're sustainably solvable.
Yeah.
And we have done this program 20 times with over 80 projects. And the only requirements of these projects are they must seem impossible. Your manager would never allow you to work on them. And your colleagues would tell you they're not feasible, it's not practical, there's no budget, and your family would worry. And if you did try and fail on this project, you would bring shame on your family for generations to come. All right. That's the only requirement. Okay, Alan, you get in the picture. And so then at the end, these middle layer people present to their top executives in the headquarters in Tokyo, for crying out loud. And they have presented over 80 projects in the last 16 years. Well, last time I checked, over 30 of them have happened.
Wow.
Okay. And then these people at this level, they can see things that the executives will never perceive. And you just tell them, hey, go work on impossible and make it safe for them to do so without risking, you know, their career. And they achieve impossible repeatedly.
Yeah. And that's why, so although technically I'm called a consultant, it's not really what I do. So, you know, consultants, when I was on the client side, it seemed to me that consultants would create a lot of work for themselves, produce some very smart, glossy looking documents, and then nothing changed in the organization. And the people in the organization usually have all the answers. It's just that somebody needs to set up the framework, the way for that view to be channeled, and then somebody with the authority to say, let's do this as a result.
And sometimes the people are so committed to these projects, they tell me, hey, Kimberly, even if the executives don't support, we're still going to do it.
Yeah.
And other times, these people, they just plant the seeds into the minds of a broader audience and they don't even continue working on it. But a few years later, boom, it happens. I mean, because we're planting these ideas in people's brains. Because just because you have an idea, it doesn't mean you have to fully own implementing it. You can think it's impossible. You tell 1,000 people, trust me, what I know you can fit into a little tiny box this big, right? But 1,000 people thinking about the same problem, they have ideas. And I mean, I often ask people, what percent of everything in the entire universe do you personally know? What do you think, Alan? What percentage do you personally know?
0.00001.
Most people say something well below 1%. So then I tell them, just because it seems impossible to you, that doesn't mean anything. Something in the 99.99999% that you don't know could make it possible, even easy. And your job is to get the word out there, to point to that North Star, to point to that mountaintop and say, wouldn't it be cool? I have no idea how to get there, but wouldn't it be amazing if we could get there together? Other people will come to your rescue.
Yeah, there's a great exercise that I haven't done for years actually, but I love it. It's I don't know what you call the nails with the flat head top.
Oh yeah, okay.
So imagine one of those hammered into a block of wood. And then you are given like 3 dozen similar nails, and you give these to groups of, say, 7 people, and you ask them, how many nails do you think you can balance on the single nail head?
Mm.
And then you listen to the conversations, and it's like, well, do you think we could balance 2 across the nail head and then 2 on top of that? And they roll off. And so most people give up. And the answer is 1 maximum, because you can put the head of the nail inverted on the head of the nail that's in the block of wood. Then you're able to show them that you can actually position 1 nail in this direction with the head here, and the other nail in the opposite direction, and then create a cradle by using those 2 as a spine. You can therefore create a cradle with, I think, 16 nails in it, which you then balance on the inverted nail that's stuck in the block of wood. So to your point, it's people saying, well, we thought 2 might be possible. We settled with 1. That's our maximum. And then you can actually stack multiple cradles, so you can actually do 48 nails on this 1. So it's an incredibly powerful exercise.
I think that is a perfect place to bring in humility. When we are working on impossible challenges, and when are we not in the business world working on impossible, to have the humility to understand that what we know is a very small percentage of what's available out there, and to invite help, to invite people to work together as a team. Business is a team sport. You don't see a soccer team, a football team out there playing with 1 person against 11 on the competition, right? And so for us to say something's impossible, it is a complete lack of humility and a complete lack of understanding of the limits of human intelligence. And think back to my favorite unhumble person, which is Lord Kelvin, who in the 1890s, here's this British mathematician and physicist guy, and he says in the 1890s, heavier than air flying machines are impossible. Okay, now, Alan, this is when there were birds.
Yeah.
Okay, they're heavier than air. And now he doesn't say, oh, they may take hundreds or thousands of years to develop and rely on technology I can barely comprehend. I mean, what a lack of humility to say it's impossible because he can't immediately figure out how to do it.
Yeah.
That is ridiculous. So let's hold up Lord Kelvin. Let's put his face on the card the next time you print these cards, huh?
Now, while you've got the card in front of you, you have a look at the penultimate question on the card, because it's an invitation to ask your own question. So could I invite you to think about that? So your own question about humility, beginning with who, what, where, when, why, or how.
Okay. When you achieve infinite, amazing power of any kind, what will you do to ensure that you remain humble so that you have humility in the face of that kind of power?
Yeah. All right. So I've no idea why this has come into my mind. So I'll share it with you in good faith. And it's doing the washing up and weeding the garden. There you go. And the second one, I've got a little bit more to share, because a guy that I knew who was a gardener said to me, just remember when you do the weeding in the garden, not to fool yourself that you're going to win. You will never win, but you can try and keep up. So I think those 2 activities would be good ways to remind yourself to be. What about you, Kimberly?
Wow. Yeah. Here I am thinking, oh, I'll never have that kind of power. Oh, boy. I think I already do have a lot of power that I don't realize, a lot of influence, and I need to be reminded of that. I need people to tell me, hey, Kimberly, don't underestimate your impact.
Yeah.
Everything you say and do, you're influencing people and people are watching you. And that comes with responsibility to make sure that I'm at my highest and best for those people whom I serve, and not to get into this selfish stance. It's like, oh, I'm grouchy or miserable or whatever. Hey, when I'm having a bad day, it can have a really big influence on the people I serve. And so I need a reminder. I need some trusted colleague who will come to me and say, okay, take a breath, spend 30 seconds laughing or do something to reset yourself, because you are impacting these people.
Yeah, and you, in the type of work you do and the style of work you do, it's probably more important for you than it is for somebody who's doing a different job. Because, if you're, let's say, in an office and you're in the finance department, then you don't have that much of an impact perhaps on your colleagues, but companies are paying good money for their people to be fired up and inspired by you. So if you're falling short, then they are too.
Absolutely. I need to partner with people to do my work properly, because it can be very easy to lose track of my impact on others. I like to say you can't see the back of your own head.
Yeah.
And we can't perceive our positive or our negative impact very accurately. And we don't get that kind of feedback the more positional power we have. Like one CEO said, the day I got promoted to CEO is the last day anybody told me the truth. So for me, having humility requires trusted partners who will say, take a breath, you're doing it. I like to have some kind of symbol like hold up the chicken or wave something around that lets me know I'm in that danger zone.
And so just while we were talking there, you mentioned in business, and I'd given you a couple of examples that were more personal, but I'm just thinking back to when I was in line manager and executive positions in the corporate world. So two examples. One, I used to do a back to the floor program for my senior team. And I remember the last property I ran had a championship golf course there. And so my day was with the greenkeepers, the guys that look after the golf course. And I remember we had to start work at 5:30 in the morning, and I had to rake a sand bunker. And then we had our first break at 7:00 in the morning, and it was like coffee and the very best bacon sandwich I've ever tasted, I think it was. So that is, and then the other thing that comes to mind is I used to run sessions with the most junior people in the organization. So no managers present and from different functions. And the agenda was always the same, two agenda points. One, how can we make our customer service better? And the second was, how can we make this a better place to work? And they were by far the most informative meetings that I had, with no managers there, no filters, just the guys from the front line. How did you think of such a great question so quickly?
Maybe it's been troubling me for years, Alan. And you finally released it with your ValuesJam tool. Thank you.
So time has flown, and let's draw the ValuesJam to a close. And the question to close is always the same, which is, what are you encouraged to do differently about humility as a result of our conversation?
Yeah, I think I'm going to reconsider my power and not be so quick to dismiss the power that I have by nature of my personality, my intelligence, the kind of work I do. And I'm going to understand that I need to show up actively in humility and not just assuming, oh, I'm just one of the guys. Yeah. I have to acknowledge I am a very powerful person, even if I don't have any position or title, because of the intensity of my personality, and own that power and be in humility around that.
Great answer. So mine is I'm kind of surprised by this, and it's come out of my curiosity. When we were talking about leaders and why they don't display more humility, and you've explained some of that answer, but the other bit of the answer for me is, why are leaders not taught and helped to develop this more proactively? So what I'm going to do is some research around what stuff is out there to see if it's any good and if it deserves more airtime, because I think it's much needed.
Absolutely. And I'd be happy to contribute to that. I'll send you some of my tricks and tips on how to convince super smart people that they probably need to listen to other people as a survival skill. Listening is what will save us from making horrible mistakes that our brains lead us into.
Well, that's a brilliant note to end on, Kimberly. So thank you so much for values jamming today. It's been it's been a blast, actually, and I've really enjoyed your props as well and your energy. So thank you so much.
All right. Thank you. Take care.